Good evening, and welcome to our 2022 convention workshops. This workshop is Congregational Discernment. I am Tracy Grigsby, and I will be your moderator for the next hour. We hope this will be an interactive presentation, but we would like to ask you to please keep your microphone muted unless you're called on. If you have a question, please use the raise hand feature or post your question in the chat room. I'll do my best to call on you as we have time. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter of our discussion, the Reverend Thomas Skillings, interim pastor of Grace Episcopal Church in Kirkwood. Thomas?
Thank you. I'm going to change your instruction a little bit because we're going to do more conversing and less hand raising. So you can, keep your microphone on if your dog is barking or something like that. But feel free to jump in anytime. There's not that many of us here, and so I think we can have a group conversation. And a lot of this is going to be a conversation tonight. But I'd like to begin by just having us introduce ourselves. If you need to change your name on your little picture, that might be helpful for the rest of us too. So I know you're not Gordon, so did you guys know how to do that? You go to your little picture and click on the little dots, and there will be a thing that says rename on there. But in a verbal way, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself and your congregation or community, and to help me out just a little bit, say something about what drew you to this particular workshop tonight. I'm not going to go around. I'll just invite you. I'll just introduce myself and give you time to think. I'm Thomas, as Tracy said, and I am the transitional rector at Grace Church in Kirkwood, where I've been for about maybe coming up on 5 months now, 4.5 months or 5 months. And I am otherwise a free-range priest. And I am fascinated with questions, which is why I'm here tonight, to think about questions with you.
Oh, Janice.
Gary now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But you do need to turn your microphone on. No problem.
Sorry, you said we could turn them back on and I didn't. I'm Janice Evans from Advent. And what drew me to this particular workshop was that I've been on several discernment committees for people considering the priesthood or the diaconate. And I thought it would be interesting to see about discerning for congregations as opposed to discerning just for individuals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'm Gary Allen, and I'm priest in charge at Trinity DeSoto in my retirement. And I was attracted by your background as an interim ministry, because that's always fascinated me, the idea of facilitating a transition. But I've never had the opportunity to do that in my own ministry. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be, there has to be a lot of learning about listening to congregations involved in managing a transition. And so it was your background that made me want to hear what you had to say about managing transitions.
Thank you, Gary.
I'll speak up. I'm Lynn Ballard. I'm a member at Grace Kirkwood, and we are going through a period of discernment at Grace, and I'm involved with the discernment team. And I figured if I got into Thomas's workshop tonight, I could have the inside scoop.
Thanks, Lynn.
Hi, I'm Cindy Van Moore, and I'm a member of Christ Church Raw. And I just thought that the topic of this workshop was very interesting, and I'm just wanting to learn more about everything. I'm a new vestry member, so I'm glad to be at your workshop tonight.
Thank you, Cindy. Welcome.
I'm Richard Wiskus. I'm the vicar for All Saints Farmington, St. Paul's Ironton. I'm bivocational clergy, so I have a full-time job working at State Hospital. And both of my congregations are part of the Requiem or Renaissance program, cohort 1 and 2. So the more information I get about discernment with regard to congregations, the better off I am.
Thank you, Richard. Gary, I think you're trying to talk and your microphone may be off.
No.
Okay, I can go. I think there might be one or two people here who might not know me. I'm Deb Goldfetter, and I'm deacon in charge at All Saints in St. John's in Eolia and Calvary in Louisiana, and I've been there since 9/11. I was drawn to this by meeting you, Tom, and thinking that you sounded like you had something interesting to offer in the first place. And in the second place, I think there's a lot of listening and discerning that's going on at these two congregations, and it's an interesting place to be right now. And so I'm looking for ideas.
Thanks, Deb. All right, we'll take just another minute or so. If anybody else would like to introduce
We do
themselves.
have one hand raised, Laurie Cooper.
Oh, sorry. I'm from Trinity, St. Charles, and I was drafted as warden of our convocation. And as somebody just brand spanking new to that this year, I've got one more year to go, and I thought this might help me in my role.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ashley Snyder. I'm from St. Timothy's in Creve Coeur. I'm a convention delegate. This will be the first time I actually get to go somewhere for convention. I've only attended online before. We have a new rector at our church, and very interested to talk with everyone tonight, and look forward to speaking with you this weekend if you're attending the conference.
All right. Well, I don't want to cut anybody off, but I'll encourage you to introduce yourself if you haven't had the chance in the midst of our conversation, so we can dive into what we're going to do tonight. So I think I'd just like to start with a provocative statement, and then we're going to chew on that all evening tonight. And the provocative statement is that our biggest challenge is not to get to the right answer, but to discern the right questions. And what I mean when I say that is that, and you'll see, is that we often have kind of stock things that we think of as problems that we have to solve. And well, we'll see how that works out. But I think what I'm going to talk about tonight is what are some ways to get at the questions we need to be asking? And then what are some ways to listen when people share with us their questions as well? So I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to share a couple of resources with you so you can see. Now I need to go back to my other thing, get the right one up. Cool. So there's a wonderful little book out. If somebody said they'd served on a discernment committee for people in ordination, and there's a book on discernment by the same little group of people for individual discernment. But they also wrote a book for congregations about discerning. It's called Discerning God's Will Together. And they define discernment in a number of ways. In very basic ways, to distinguish good from evil. That's the Latin and the Greek word. To find the authentic and the valuable, and to recognize the counterfeit. To see the heart of the matter with spiritual eyes from God's vantage point. To see beneath surface events through illusions within human systems and beyond the immediate and the transient. To locate the immediate and particular within a vision of the broad and distant landscape. To see the trees in the forest, they say. And then there's a kind of mystical discernment that's kind of a little immediate aha moment of direct insight. Let's just take a minute. Do any of those jump out at any of you? If anybody wants to share one that really jumps out at them. You don't have to raise your hand, just turn your microphone on and go ahead and speak.
This is Lynn Ballard. I'll speak. The one that I'm resonating with right now is to locate the immediate and particular within a vision of the broad and distant landscape, to see the trees and the forest. Probably not the same as noticing the elephant in the room, but it's close. Sometimes we start talking about our congregation, our parish, who we are, and it turns into a very generalized, pretty vision. And then some of the most obvious things that we could be proud of or worried about don't get mentioned. They seem to be not noticed, but or worthy of being talked about. So that's the one that appeals to me.
Doris put the resource in the chat, by the way, if you want to download it for the book. Anything else that you see there?
Yeah, this is Doris. To see the heart of the matter with spiritual eyes. What I find is difficult for many people and many congregations is to not have an agenda and to be open to possibilities that maybe were not even on their radar screen. To be able to, or to try and see things as in the sacred and as God sees them is much harder, obviously, than seeing them as we would want to see them. But that's what true discernment, I believe, calls for. And it says not in the immediate and or beyond the immediate and the transient. And I think as a culture we have different difficulty with that. But I think it's crucial if we're going to really discern well.
Thank you, Doris.
This is Ashley Snyder from St. Timothy's. I was really struck about to find the authentic and recognize the counterfeit. uh, about maybe we can get lost and not realize that we've wandered away. That was really striking to me.
Is there a particular thing you have in mind as you share it that you'd be willing to share?
Not from many years ago when I was a child, about people being pushed out of their church. And were we really on the path we should have been on with the way we treat people? We were lost, and you could say that group was lost in the counterfeit and not recognizing the authentic.
Thank you, Ashley. So let me just move on a little bit. So I love this book because it's pretty concrete. It's a nice book, and it talks about 4 discernment steps. And I love that they put this first discernment step is framing, which is to clarify the question. What are we really trying to discern? What really is the question before us? And what I would like to do is do a little exercise with you all to think a little bit more about that. With let me see if I can find a common question that often comes up. Well, I just had one in my own congregation. Somebody was actually, they went straight to an answer, and they said, what we need is a youth minister. Okay. And somebody said, yes, we've been saying that for 25 years. So that's good. And then it led me to think, I didn't do it in the moment, but to think, well, what is the real question behind that immediate solution or perceived need? You could put anything in there. We need more people in the church. We need, better administration, whatever the question is. But to see a statement or even an beginning question as an invitation to mine a little bit deeper. So I'm going to call it question mining. This is the first time I've kind of rolled this out, but it's an interesting idea. So I might say the trick to question mining is never to give an answer, but just to give another question. So why do we need a youth minister? Nope, no answers. You can't give an answer. What do the youth in our community need? No answer. I mean, it might be good to ask these questions to youth sometime, maybe. What do we hope youth would get from us having a youth minister? Let's just play with this. So if we were to mine, what might be other questions to ask about that? Anybody have another question?
Is there anyone already here who could serve in the role that we think we need a youth minister for?
Okay.
What would you like to see different in the youth of the church?
I'd also say, did anyone talk to the parents of the youth? Or not just the youth themselves, but their families? What are they looking for? What do they need? What do they feel is missing?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about a particular kind of question, but a way I might reframe that question a little bit is just simply, who do we need to talk about this with? Just a little thing. What do we see in our parish life that causes us to think a youth minister is the answer? I wonder about
Where's
that.
the ouchie?
Oh, the great. Yeah, where's the herd? That's nice. Yeah, I like it. That's great. So let me share with you just another little screen share here.
It also seems to me while you're doing that
Yeah, go ahead.
is what is the fear?
That's a great, you could use that for almost anything, right?
Well, yeah, and
Great.
I'm seeing that right now, obviously up with these little churches where I am. What do they fear?
Yeah.
And they have natural fears of, will this church be here for me? Or will this be here after me? There's a lot of fears, but
Mhm.
it's rarely about youth ministry.
Great. Great. Thanks, Deb. Yeah, those are great. Here's some interesting ideas that come from I'm forgetting the World Cafe model. I don't know if you know World Cafe, but it's a way of gathering very often larger groups of people together to explore an issue. And they too have said, one of the most important things to do up front is come up with a good question. And they even talk about having world cafes about coming up with the good question. Like, what is the real question that matters? And they have this wonderful little list of things to consider when you're trying to consider a particular question for your congregation. What question, if explored thoroughly, could provide the breakthrough possibilities we are seeking? Is the question relevant to the real work of the congregation or church? I don't know about you, but you all are in the governing strata of the church, and your convention delegates perhaps, and things like that. You know how quickly a vestry meeting can worry about what kind of coffee should be served at the coffee hour, and how much time could be spent on such questions. But is it really relevant to the real work of the congregation? This is an interesting one. Is this a genuine question to which we really don't know the answer? That's called an honest question. People can often ask questions that are not open or honest by saying something like, well, have we ever thought of Billy Smith? He's a coach for the football team. That's not really a question, is it? That's really somebody saying, I think we should do Billy Smith. He's the coach for the question. But is it a general question? Is a question that you really don't know the answer to? Very often this means it's not like a yes or no question too. So it's like a how, a what, a why, who, rather than, should we do this or that? So that's kind of a genuine question. What work do I want this question to do? You can ask a question in a way that helps people feel one way or another. What do we have to do to keep from dying? That's an interesting question, but it may evoke the kind of feelings that you're not trying to get at when you're opening that question up. You might ask the question, what do we need to do to thrive, right? As opposed to the other way. What assumptions or beliefs are embedded in the way the question is constructed? One of my favorite is this question likely to generate hope, imagination, engagement, new thinking, and creative action, Or is it likely to increase focus on past problems and obstacles? I see that a lot. Does this question, and this is what we were doing a little bit with our question mining, does this question leave room for new and different questions to be raised as the initial question is explored? So those are, I find those helpful when you sit back and go, is this the real question? I'm going to pick on Lynn a little bit. I'm just going to pick maybe on every church in transition. The question that the discernment team thinks that their job is who's going to be our next rector? But is that the real question? What do you all think?
Is it more of what the needs are or what our needs are? What are we looking for?
What are we looking for? That's good. Just go ahead and throw out a few questions that you think might be interesting questions in that particular situation.
Where do we need to grow?
Where do we need to grow?
How can we balance the gifts of a potential rector with the gifts of the church or the parish?
Any other questions you might be wondering about if you are in that situation?
What
I
are
think,
some of the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry. I think one question might be, what might a new rector expect of us?
What are some of the traits we would like the next rector to have?
So what question would you want to answer before you ask that question?
Who are we right now?
Who are we right now? That's a good question. So you can see, it's I think maybe the main the main focus is sometimes we think we have to fix a certain problem and we immediately go there instead of really thinking about what the question is, which is why one of the tricks is, can you reframe a problem as a question? Whenever somebody has a problem, can you think about the questions that have to do with that problem? So I think we're not going to do this little exercise because we don't have a ton of time. So let's just take a minute and think about, let me just invite you to think about your own. We can stick to congregations here. You could think of your own life and think, what's a question in your congregation right now? What's an important question in your congregation right now?
How can we engage the youth of the parish when we have so few kids in the church that if we get them together, they're mostly thinking they're with their siblings?
What else? What are some questions in your parishes right now?
Something as simple as where do we go from here?
A big question, right? So that's a forest question. That's a great question. Can you think of a tree question that goes with that, that's related to that?
We have a new rector. So how can we learn more about her goals and how they align with the goals that we may have already had? we're still learning about each other.
How can we learn more about each other? Yeah, that's great. I can
Common question at,
imagine.
oh,
I was just going to say, Ashley, I can imagine in a congregation with a new rector, you have people all over the map. You may have people who are saying who want her to tell you what to do next. And you have people worried that she's going to tell you what to do next. And you have people that just want to get on with it. They've been waiting for however long you guys have not had a rector, a year and a half, or permanent rector, a year and a half.
2 years.
Yeah, right. Just want to get on with it, you know? And that's a pretty wonderful question, though. I like that. Thank you. How do we find out about each other? Sorry, Richard, I interrupted you.
no, it's okay. A common question at All Saints is, how do we grow? And is it about numbers? Is it about spiritual growth? But the question always that comes down is, how do we grow? And that's where we kind of are with the question. It's like it's there floating in the air. It's like all the time. How do we grow? Is it about is it about putting butts in the seats? When the bishop visits, he doesn't say that. He says it's not about butts in the seats.
Mm-hmm.
But for my congregation, it's how do we get more people in this building?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to do with those people if you get them in the building?
Yeah.
Good question.
So I'm wondering if there's if there might be a way to keep engaging them in the question. What do you mean by growth? What do you hope to see when that happens? Right? Whenever people want to say, go ahead.
Last night I had a budget committee meeting, which means me, the treasurer, and the warden. And the treasurer brought up the question about his own spiritual growth in the congregation. I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is a little glimmer of light that we haven't seen. So I think he's starting to reframe the question a little bit different for himself. There is a lot of times when they talk about getting butts in the seats, it's about the budget. It's about getting the numbers up so we have more funds, so we're not so dependent on the bishop's office or the diocese. It's like, okay, I get that. But the nuances are starting to peak a little bit, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Yeah.
One thing we could ask is, has anyone thought there was something here that was great enough that they've ever invited someone to come to church with them?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, that's a beautiful kind of question. You might think about a way to ask it in a way that you wouldn't get a yes or no answer.
Okay.
What can we offer?
Yeah. What's the greatest thing we've done? Or what do we offer that someone might want to come to? Yeah. Yeah. Good questions.
I haven't heard anyone ask what God wants yet. Mm-hmm. What is God's deepest longing for the parish? What is God's highest aspiration? Where is it going according to God? Not what we can think.
Mm-hmm. Or that's the helpful Forrest question. What does God want for the world? And where do we fit into that? Yeah, right.
In that sense, then it becomes a question of how do we model what the world should look like? Perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we find out what God wants for us?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Have we made time or space to hear God?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're awfully busy telling God what what we need to do rather than listening. As Valerie has said, we tend to want to take charge over that with God. I love what our bishop says when he says that filling, butts in the pews. He said, that's above my pay grade, that's God's job. It's our job to teach people how to live like Jesus.
Mhm.
And, so I kind of turned that around with this congregation who's so frightened about the numbers. It's like, well, we have to make people feel welcome first. And if they feel welcome, then they'll bring other people who feel they've been marginalized, and we'll go from there, But it goes back to that thing that I said before about fear. What do they fear?
Yeah, and so I want to respond to a minute to what Valerie said. I think for Christian people, we want to find out what God wants. My experience is there's a low, I don't know how to say that. I don't want to sound bad. Sometimes there's not, I think in discerning God's will, there's that Fred Buechner thing about, our vocation is where the world's great need and our great gifts meet. And I think God works that way too. And the question of what God wants and who are we really are deeply intertwined, because what God wants in each individual congregation and each individual space is unique. It's not, there's not a blanket statement. So, Bishop Dion is really excited about loving people as Jesus loves them. That's great. But it's really easy then for a congregation to say, oh yeah, that's what we need to do, without doing that kind of work of questioning. So I have a bias that God is at work in all of our churches and in all of our people, and that God actually has planted a seed of God's dream in people's hearts, but that sometimes people aren't encouraged to listen to that very much. And so part of the thing about this workshop is how do we get people to begin to listen and to get below the where we usually like to go as Americans, which is just to fix things, is to see a problem and fix it, rather than, and then we're always fixing the wrong problems. It's like me doing home improvement, home repairs. What a disaster, Anyway, I'd like to share one more thing with you before we go tonight, one more little practice, and it's a practice that, and I'll put the links of all of these into the chat before we go, so you can just download all these pages and stuff if you want to download them. As long as Tracy lets us stay on for 5 minutes after, so you have time to download them. But I'll put the links in there so you can download them from Google Drive. But so some of the work I'm involved in has to do with the Centers for Courage and Renewal, creating circles of trust. And what we do in those is try to help people listen deeply to their own, what God is saying to them and their own souls. And the way we talk about it is we talk about it as listening another person into speech. Listening a person into speech. And the observation is that very often when we're in conversation with somebody, we're not really trying to listen. We're not really trying to listen to what they're saying. We're formulating our response, and we're ready to let them know what we think before they they can think deeply. And so I just love this idea of changing my expectation in a conversation to be listening to somebody really hard so I can help them say what they are trying to say or what God is trying to say through them. And one of the practices for that kind of listening into speech is a practice called asking open and honest questions. And we've started to do that a little bit, but I wanted to share with you, and I'll share the resource with you just a little bit more about what that means. So first I have to go to the right place, find the right document. You guys are probably all great at Zoom and you have no problem with sharing documents and stuff on Zoom, but okay, there we go. Where is that? Is that it? Yes, hooray, that's excellent. So this is actually a 3-page document. I invite you to read through it. It has a lot of information, more than we can cover tonight. This is a practice of asking open and honest questions. It's often used a little more of a kind of in a one-on-one situation, but you could use it in a group situation. But again, the purpose of asking the question is to help the other people articulate what God is telling them or their own wisdom or however you want to talk about that. And some of these you'll recognize, and I'm just gonna chat about them. And as I do, I'm gonna pause between these little paragraphs and invite you to make any comments you want to make, just to have a little conversation about it. So this one we talked about already. The best single mark of an open and honest question is the questioner cannot possibly anticipate the answer to it. And that's what we talked about, those open questions. So you can see some of these are open questions. What surprises you? You have no idea what someone's going to answer to that. What moved or touched you about that? What inspired you? What was easy? What was hard? Sometimes it's just a matter of how you frame it. If you say, was that easy? Your person's going to say yes or no. If you say, what was easy? Because they said it was pretty easy. If you say, what was easy? They're going to go a little further. Big thing is you're not asking the question to satisfy your own curiosity. You're asking the question to help the person understand what they're wanting to say. Did you learn anything from a prior experience that feels useful to you now? How do you feel about the experience you just described? I was in a conversation today with somebody, and they said, well, how does your husband feel about that? That's a curiosity question. Maybe you could think of it with them, but it's fun to stay with the person's language, find a keyword. A person says, I just want our youth to feel loved. And if you want to stay with their language, when you ask them a question, you say, well, what does love look like to you? What does that look like? What would that be like? Just do short questions. What were your expectations or hopes? Trust your own intuition. Just listen deeply. One thing that's not in here is one of our practices is called respecting the silence. So this is really hard in group meetings to just let people be silent while they're thinking about what's next without feeling like you have to nudge them on. Let me see if there's other simple questions. Talked about right, wrong answers. Here's a not an honest question. my favorite easy one is, don't you think you should get therapy? Don't you think it would be helpful to talk to her? Is not an open question. What is, because you're trying to lead them, you're trying to give them advice, is what you're doing when you say that. Let me give you some advice about what you're dealing with, as opposed to what might be most helpful or least helpful. And use of image or metaphors that might relate to things that direct questions don't. If our parish was a book, which chapter would we be in? What would be in the table of contents? Right. My great-great-grandfather went on a wagon train from Missouri to California twice. So I might say, well, if you were traveling across the country in a wagon train, where are you now? There's just something about asking a question in a metaphorical kind of way that unlocks a piece of a person's brain, that asking a direct question can kind of somehow make them shy and maybe not want to ask. So there are a couple of exercises here that you all can do. I did want to just leave a couple of minutes here at the end to talk about questions or hear your insights on how this might work in your parish life. I work on it in my family life too. These work pretty good in your family too, in case you don't. For those of you who want to fix your spouses or your children or something, this kind of listening can work pretty well with others.
I love all of these thoughts about asking questions and formulating questions in ways that are open and honest and don't have answers embedded in them. It's so hard to get away from that because hardly anybody ever calls us on it. You know, if somebody says, you know, if I did ask that, you know, don't you think therapy would help you? My little brother, who isn't so little anymore, but years ago, I offered him some advice embedded in a question. He said, you know, that's what Dear Abby's for, and I'll let you know when I'm trying to get some advice. So brothers can be blunt, but I do think that if we could get into the practice with each other in a respectful way to challenge some of the things that are said, doing it respectfully, but not just simply letting it go as, you know, I guess that's the best, you know, that's the best we'll get of this. So I'm going to ask you this question. Are there tips in these books, and I think probably in these longer documents, for challenging questions that aren't the right questions and getting a conversation on track?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, Lynn. I think part of it has to do with setting the context. In other words, coming to a shared understanding that you are trying to ask questions to go deeper rather than get immediate answers. And so you've set the context. So it's fair when you can push back and then to say, oh, you know what? I think that's short-circuiting the kind of question I wanted to ask. Or sometimes the language we use in circles of trust, especially in training, is, oh, that didn't really quite land right for me. Could you ask that another way? Or, you know, it's making those I statements more than anything else about, oh, that didn't really work for me. And hopefully, if you have this shared understanding, you understand that you're working on something together, and it's not a criticism of the individual. It's just we're working on this, asking good questions, and yeah, that didn't quite land right for me. Can you try another way? Can you think of another way to ask it? Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, maybe can you tell me a little bit more about why you asked that question?
Yeah, that's great. That's interesting. What do you think we need to be thinking about? You know, I mean, yeah, right. I like that, Lori, the way you just kind of turn it back into another question. How can you imagine using, or how you might use this practice in your own congregation?
I think there may be moments even in preaching where you can, if you have a well-crafted question, and you just kind of lay it out there for them to think on. Now, I come from, my history is more contemplative, having come from many years ago. I came from the Dominicans. So we were very much about sitting and pondering, you know, and so I think even in preaching, we can, if we are, you know, in the midst of something, and of course, it's my opinion, the gospel lesson that's assigned is always good for whatever's happening. That there could be a well-crafted question that could be laid before the congregation to kind of ruminate on. But then the key part of that is affording the time somewhere for sharing the fruits of that contemplation. That's a Dominican motto, by the way, sharing the fruits of contemplation.
Can you say a word really quickly about maybe a little more than you said? That's really, I hadn't heard that before, about how that pondering and this deep questioning, how those go together in the Dominican practice, or thinking about them in parish practice.
Yeah, in community practice, in a religious house, you know, this idea of discernment, I think, I find was easier to do because y'all know what the goal is. It's the health of this community, and what discerning whatever it was. So to take and sit and pray through, and in whether it be sitting in chapel and praying and thinking about the question and really formulating and being open to what was being said, whether it be from the elders in the community or from the Spirit, whatever was moving us, but then bringing that back into a context where people could share what they heard. So that sharing that fruit of the contemplation was, what did you hear in prayer that was related to that question? So perhaps I'm just going to put it out there, in an ideal vestry meeting, if you weren't my vestry meetings are always worried about, you know, okay, we got to pay the electric bill and all this fun stuff, and you know what color the faucet's going to be. But taking time to actually sit down with, you know, again, it's a well-crafted situation. It just doesn't happen. But allowing that time within the context of even a bishop's committee meeting to sit with a question. Maybe we take a break, move into chapel or church, sit for a few minutes, and then come back. And that's in the ideal world. Have I ever done that with my congregations? No. I'll be honest with you, I've not, because it's so. I think it would be an awesome way to do that. And for me, a lot of what we're talking about tonight is congregations have to look at, I know my congregations in particular, and myself in general, specifically, I need to be able to decide or delineate what needs discernment, what needs just a decision. Okay, the faucets need to turn on and off. That's a decision, just do it. A discerning question with regard to faucets is, should we really think about making our bathrooms all unisex bathrooms? And what does that look like? There is I would say for me as a distinction between, that's a discernment. If we're going to really structurally change, or do we need to structurally change our bathrooms to be non-gender specific? The decision is, once, whatever it is, we need a new faucet. Which one are we buying?
That's really helpful.
I probably went down a really weird path for you there, Thomas. I'm sorry.
Makes good sense.
Makes me want to ask questions about, what message do unisex bathrooms send? Right? Makes it, there are more questions with that, right? About why you
know. Exactly. Yeah.
Be a fruitful conversation.
I'll be at convention. We can get together.
This all sounds very Quakerish to me.
It is very Quakerish. I have to admit.
Went to a Quaker college, so
it comes out of a lot of it comes from Parker Palmer, who's a Quaker practitioner. It has a lot of those underpinnings of Quakerism, which in some ways runs headlong into Episcopalianism. Tension, there might be a little tension there.
Well, I think that tension too is we live in a world that is decision driven. We need to make, when you look at your vestry or your bishop's committee, what is the occupation of these people? So when I look at my congregation, my vestries, my bishop's committees, I've got teachers, I've got former engineers, I've got people like myself who don't know exactly what they're doing. They're all decision makers. They just want to get it done and move on to the next thing because that's their life. How do we then, and I think this is where maybe the treasurer is trying to sneak in that question about spiritual growth that I mentioned earlier. How do we move? We got to make decisions. They got to be made, but how do we move into that next piece of looking at the bigger question about, we want to grow the church, but what really do we want to grow? That is kind of bringing that full circle. Those are the questions I have.
Well, thank you all for an engaging conversation tonight. And we'll see many of you at convention, and, let's see if we can have a secret handshake or a secret question, some little thing. We'll just ask each other a question before we make a statement.
So Tom, your articles said we didn't have access and we had to ask your permission.
Oh my gosh, well.
And so I sent you several requests.
Great. Just click ask for permission, and I will, as my penance for not somehow setting up the document right, I will give you all, if you want them, just click on the button and I'll give you all access.
Okay.
What button do we click on?
I think it says you need to have access, and I think there's a button in the response that says ask for access. And if you do that, I'll give it to you. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to leave you. You have to go in a minute, but I want to leave you with one little. We call this a grace note in the things, and this is I promise you get to go in just a second. Let me just share this. Many of you may know this Rilke quote. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into an answer. Thank you all. Tracy, anything you need to tell us before we go?
I do. Give me just one moment, please. I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight, with a special thanks to our presenter, the Reverend Thomas Skilling, for this terrific presentation. This presentation and all other presentations tonight were recorded. We'll be posting them on the website after convention if you want to go back and watch more. I'd like to remind all delegates that convention registration begins at noon tomorrow at the DoubleTree Hotel in Chesterfield. For those who are not delegates, we will have 2 opportunities for you to join us online. We'll be live streaming our keynote speaker Thursday night tonight, beginning at 6 p.m. We'll also live stream our convention Eucharist, which includes the bishop's annual address that will be on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. You can watch those live streams on our diocesan Facebook page. As a reminder, you can find this information and all convention resources on our website at diocesemo.org/2022-convention. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.